In the 1950s, the effects of Emperor Haile Selassie's efforts to modernize Ethiopia began to show, most visibly in the capital, Addis Ababa. At the heart of the nation's politics stood the Menelik Palace, the empire's political nerve center, where all significant state business was conducted. To further cement his legacy, Selassie ordered the construction of a new landmark in 1955 called the Jubilee Palace. Perched on a hill in Addis Ababa, it was designed to host visiting dignitaries and symbolize the emperor's commitment to international diplomacy and Ethiopia's growing prominence on the world stage. But despite Selassie's push for modernization, the transformation was largely confined to the cities. For most Ethiopians in the rural areas, life had changed little since the country's liberation from Italian occupation in 1941. Traditional land ownership structures remained unchanged, with nearly a third of economically viable land owned by the emperor's extended family, and much of the rest divided between the church and the noble elite. This system left most of the country's farmers trapped as tenant laborers, burdened by excessive taxes and tribute payments that made it nearly impossible to improve their livelihoods. The government relied heavily on agricultural exports, particularly coffee, to fund the industrial imports essential for modernization. While initially bringing steady growth to the country's economy, the strategy faltered by the mid-1950s due to increasing competition from Latin American and other African exporters. The situation worsened in 1956 with the Suez Canal crisis, which disrupted Ethiopia's exports of grain and coffee, dealing a heavy blow to the economy. Then, in 1959, a devastating famine struck the provinces of Wallo, Tigray, and Harar, highlighting the dire consequences of neglecting rural reforms. Soon, discontent about Selassie's government began to rise, not only among peasants who suffered the brunt of these hardships, but also among the educated elite. You see, Selassie had sent a select group of young Ethiopians abroad to study, hoping they would return with skills and knowledge to help modernize the nation. However, upon their return, many found themselves disillusioned. Familiar with the economic and political advancements of the United States and Europe, they were dismayed by Ethiopia's stagnation and entrenched feudal system. Despite their education, many found themselves sidelined and unable to secure meaningful roles in the government. Soon, their frustration grew, and they began to call for fundamental reforms. One of these ambitious young reformers was Workneh Gebeyehu, a rising star in Ethiopian politics. After graduating from the military academy in Harar, Workneh quickly ascended the ranks to become one of the youngest officers in Ethiopian history, earning the emperor's trust. Recognizing the need for more efficient decision-making, Workneh established an inner circle of advisors called the Private Cabinet of His Imperial Majesty to handle critical state matters alongside the official cabinet. By 1959, Workneh had risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel, placing him at the heart of the emperor's administration. However, the disillusionment that had spread among the young elite began to affect him. A significant turning point came with the death of Ras Kassa in 1957, one of Haile Selassie's closest confidants and advisors. At 76, Kassa was a venerable figure and widely respected for his loyalty and wisdom. His death created a void in the emperor's inner circle, and Workneh, along with others, began to fill that space. Among those drawn into the political fray was Mengistu Niue, the emperor's favorite general and commander of the Imperial Guard, and his younger brother, Germame Niue. Like Workneh, Germame was one of Selassie's chosen elite. Educated in the United States at the University of Wisconsin in the late 1940s, he returned to Ethiopia filled with new ideas on governance and social reform. However, when he took up a role at the Interior Ministry, his ideas clashed with the old guard, who saw his ambitions as too radical. The emperor, wary of Germame's progressive stance, assigned him to the remote Sidamo province as governor of Walamo, far from the political center. Undeterred, Germame saw his governorship as an opportunity to bring change. It is impossible to say when Germame first conceived the idea of rebelling against the emperor and the whole political system, but sometime in 1960, he succeeded in winning his brother Mengistu over to his plan. Mengistu was no stranger to responsibility or loyalty to the emperor, but Djurmami's idealistic vision resonated with him, especially after witnessing Ethiopia's political stagnation and widespread poverty. In addition, they recruited the chief of Selassie's secret service, Lieutenant Colonel Workme Gebeyahu, which meant that they now had one of the emperor's closest confidants on their side. Together, they planned a coup to overthrow Emperor Haile Selassie. Their opportunity came with the news that the emperor would soon be departing on an extended state visit to Brazil. Drawing inspiration from Colonel Anwar el-Sadat's account of the Egyptian Revolution, Djurmami and Mengistu meticulously studied strategies for overthrowing a regime. They devised a comprehensive plan, neutralized key officials by taking high-ranking ministers and royal family members hostage, seized critical government facilities, and quickly established a new administration with themselves at the helm. Once Selassie departed, the coup leaders executed their plan with precision. They swiftly took the crown prince, Asfa-Wossen, and several high-ranking ministers hostage at the Imperial Guard headquarters. Under the guise of an urgent call, they lured additional officials to the headquarters and promptly detained them. The rebels did not stop there. They severed communication lines to hinder external intervention and took control of critical facilities, including the national radio station, the state broadcaster, the National Bank, and the finance ministry. To the public, it seemed as though the entire imperial structure was under their control. The radio broadcast would announce a new government, ostensibly backed by the Imperial Guard, to rally public support. However, their meticulous plan hit an unexpected snag. Ras Asserate Kasa, vice president of the Ethiopian Senate, managed to evade capture, as did Major General Merid Mengesha, chief of staff of the Ethiopian army. Unshaken, both men quickly set to work organizing a counter-response. With Selassie thousands of miles away, Asserate Kasa decided to alert the emperor to the unfolding crisis, knowing that his return would serve as a significant morale booster for loyalist forces. Disguising himself, Kasa reached the British embassy, where he met with Ambassador Sir Dennis Wright, who immediately contacted London. From there, word of the rebellion was relayed to Brazil. Meanwhile, the emperor received a second alert about the coup from an unlikely source. His son, Prince Haile Selassie, a radio enthusiast, had also detected the uprising and transmitted a call for help. His message reached a British ham radio operator in Middlesex, who passed it on to the Ethiopian embassy in London. Upon receiving the news, Haile Selassie cut his visit short and prepared to return immediately. Back in Ethiopia, Mengistu and Djurmami were putting their final step into motion. They planned a nationwide radio address, and in a tense broadcast, the Crown Prince read a revolutionary proclamation declaring a new government. He announced that he would assume the role of regent in a new constitutional monarchy. Ras Imru, a liberal-minded cousin of the emperor, was declared prime minister, and Major General Mulugeta Bully was appointed supreme commander of the armed forces. This attempt to legitimize the new regime seemed poised to solidify their control over the state. Yet, despite the coup leaders' careful orchestration, the response from the Ethiopian public and the military was not what they had expected. The people of Addis Ababa, and indeed much of Ethiopia, showed little enthusiasm for the change. There were no mass protests, no organized strikes, and no uprisings in the countryside. Even Mengistu's outreach to student leaders fell flat as the majority showed little interest in supporting the regime change. The coup's impact appeared to be limited to the capital, where tension was building among the detained officials and confined ministers. While Mengistu and Djurmami attempted to rally support, Ras Asserate and General Mengesha continued to mobilize loyalist forces. Soldiers loyal to the emperor gathered at the army's 1st Division headquarters, coordinating with the Air Force and dismissing any temptation to join the rebellion. Adding to the rebels' challenges, Patriarch Abuna Basilios, head of the Ethiopian Church, issued a proclamation excommunicating anyone who supported the coup, further isolating Djurmami and Mengistu. Thus far, no shots had been fired on the streets of Addis Ababa, but the coup leaders knew the tide had turned against them as they could no longer count on the army's backing. Nonetheless, they were in no mood to surrender. In a last-ditch effort to maintain control, they moved their hostages to the Zewde Palace, located opposite the Imperial Guard's headquarters. The captives were confined in the North Wing, in a chamber ominously known as the Green Salon. At about 2:30 p.m., on the 15th of December 1960, an urgent radio announcement ordered the people of Addis Ababa off the streets and into their homes. Minutes later, the first gunfire erupted. Mengistu Niue, commanding the Imperial Guard, launched an assault on the city. The attack was swiftly countered by the regular army, whose overwhelming force turned Addis Ababa into a battlefield. Fierce skirmishes erupted across the capital, with loyalist troops gradually regaining control of key areas. As a result, Mengistu and Germame held out in a desperate last stand, barricading themselves and their hostages inside the Zewde Palace. As the army closed in, they encircled the building and positioned tanks outside its gates. At the helm was Captain Dereje Haile Mariam, a son-in-law of the emperor, who called for the surrender of the Imperial Guard forces in the name of the emperor. But as he approached, Germame emerged on the balcony, raised a pistol, and shot the captain dead. This single devastating act ignited an all-out assault by the army on the palace. Consequently, in a desperate and horrifying act, Mengistu and Germame stormed the Green Salon with machine guns and opened fire on the hostages. In mere minutes, some of the most important leaders in Ethiopia were dead. Among them were Major General Mulugeta Buli and Prime Minister Ras Abebe Aragai, who succumbed to his injuries hours later. When the army stormed the palace, the rebellious ringleaders had escaped through the garage complex. By the end of 3 nerve-wracking days, the coup had been crushed, but it had exacted a heavy death toll. Over the preceding 24 hours, some 2,000 people had been killed in the battle for control of the capital. That evening, Asserate traveled to Eritrea to inform the emperor that the revolt had been put down. In the interim, Haile Selassie's flight from Brazil had landed in Asmara, Eritrea. From there, he addressed his people in a broadcast condemning the coup and absolved both his cousin Ras Imru and Crown Prince Asfa-Wossen from any blame. The address was intended to calm a shaken nation, but the emperor's relationship with his son had been irrevocably strained by the events of the coup. The fact that the crown prince had survived while many of the empire's most loyal officials had died led Selassie to question his son's role and motives in the rebellion. When Selassie finally entered Ethiopia, Prince Asfa-Wossen was there to greet him. In a gesture of humility, he threw himself onto the tarmac before his father, hoping to show his loyalty. But Haile Selassie's response was public and severe. Looking down at his son, he coldly remarked, "We would have been very proud of you if we were coming to attend your funeral. Get up!" With the emperor back in command, Ethiopian authorities quickly worked to track down and arrest the remaining coup leaders. One of the first to be captured was Lieutenant Colonel Workmay. He was discovered hiding beneath a bridge along the road up the Entoto mountain slopes. As soldiers approached, he attempted to resist. Realizing he was outmatched, he pulled out his pistol, pointing it at his temple, and defiantly said, "Theodoros has taught me something." He was referencing the legacy of Emperor Theodoros II, a former ruler of Ethiopia who, rather than face capture by the British in 1868, made the difficult choice to end his own life. Meanwhile, the plot's principal architect, Mengistu Niue, and his brother Germame managed to escape to the south. However, within days, they were tracked down by a police unit in the countryside. As they faced imminent capture, Germame turned on Mengistu, shooting him before his own life. Mengistu survived, though severely wounded, and was brought back to Addis Ababa under heavy guard for treatment. After 3 months of recovery, he was tried for high treason, found guilty, and along with 2 other co-conspirators, was executed on March 29, 1961 at Tekle Haymanot Square. In the aftermath of the coup, Emperor Haile Selassie faced the daunting task of reassembling his government. The violent uprising had decimated his cabinet, leaving key positions vacant. On February 6, 1961, he appointed 7 new ministers to restore the fractured administration. Among the newly promoted officials was Ras Asserate Kassa, who was promoted from vice president to president of the Senate. Yet, the emperor hesitated in appointing a new prime minister, uncertain of whom he could trust after such a deep betrayal. It was not until April 17, 1961, that he appointed Aklilu Habtewold as both prime minister and minister of the pen, bestowing on him the title of Sehafet Tezaz. The failed coup marked a turning point in Selassie's rule. For the first time, popular grievances were openly voiced, exposing cracks in the monarchy's foundation. This sentiment resonated deeply within the military, the very institution the emperor had carefully developed to secure his rule. Despite the rebels' promises of higher pay, they had failed to win over the army, whose loyalties ultimately lay with the emperor. In a bitter twist of fate, it would be this very military, emboldened and better organized, that would ultimately bring about the emperor's downfall 14 years later. In a striking coincidence, the rebel leader of the 1960 coup shared the same first name, Mengistu, as the man who would later overthrow the King of Kings and become Ethiopia's brutal dictator, Mengistu Haile Mariam.